Michael C. Ryan was listening to that, US defense analyst who served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO during the first Trump administration. Mr. Ryan, very good evening. Welcome to the programme. What do you make of Ukraine's position 3 years on from the first day of the Russian invasion?
Well, thank you, Ian. It's great to be on the program, and please call me Mike. To answer your question, in 12 months, I think Ukraine will be in a better and stronger position. The war might have not completely ended, but will be well on track to do so. So why am I so optimistic about the prospects? Well, President Trump campaigned on the fact that he would end the war. Everybody wants the war to end, particularly in Ukraine's favor. So how did we think that was going to play out? So let me objectify what I see going on without, of course, endorsing any of the particular moves, but just laying them out in a plausible fashion. The first thing to do is to get Russia to the negotiating table. So the first set of negotiations we saw in Riyadh were to reestablish a U.S.-Russian relationship on a range of global issues, because from the White House's point of view, we're in a geostrategic competition with China. And you notice Prime Minister Modi of India was in Washington before the Riyadh meeting, left with quite a nice package of deals in his pocket, because India is a key player for the United States in leveraging their position against the Chinese. Russia is basically a slave to China these days because of their overcommitment into the war in Ukraine. And President Trump would very much, I think, like to separate the Russians from the Chinese. So the first step, much like Gorbachev and Reagan meeting in Helsinki in 1986, after a very tumultuous first several years of the 1980s in Soviet-Western relations, is something that we can bring to mind, try to understand how this process works, because it's a process. The first thing Secretary Rubio did after he met with Sergei Lavrov was he called the Quint. That's the foreign ministers of the UK, Germany, France, and Italy, as well as the EU High Representative, Kaja Kallas, to debrief them on what the talks were about and to get their inputs as to the next steps in the process. So there's a process. As for the United States leaving Europe, not going to happen. The United States makes more money in Europe than anywhere else in the world. It invests more in Europe than anywhere else in the world. Europe invests more in the United States than anywhere in the world. And the U.S. has $19 trillion worth of assets in Europe. So from a business perspective, we're not going anywhere. U.S. troops are in Europe in the U.S. interest, and so they're not going anywhere. And Secretary Hegseth has said that, pending a review. And every administration does a review of U.S. global force posture.
But so all of the language that we...
is understandable from an emotional point of view, but from a practical point of view, I don't see it.
Well, I hope you're right, but all of the language that's coming from President Trump and Vice President Vance sends the opposite signals to that there seems to be a desire to decouple from Europe. We all know from the first administration that Donald Trump has never had a huge amount of time for NATO. So it's clear that European nations have could dramatically rethink their own defence policies and their own defence spending priorities, and I would certainly agree that they've underspent, and Donald Trump was right to point that out in the first term, which you will remember very well. And to be fair to them, most of them have. I think that when he came to power, only 4 NATO countries were contributing 2% of GDP to defence. It's now something like 22. So some progress has been made, but not enough. But how do you account for this vote in the United Nations today, with the United States voting with some countries that it wouldn't normally have been seen dead with?
Yes, it's not our finest moment, but at the same time, I don't think anybody in the State Department is crying over the fact that they lost the vote. Again, we have to get Russia back to the table, and so what I see President Trump doing, and this is my own personal view, I see him trying to take the emotion out of the discussion, to stop pointing fingers at everybody, to try to get everybody to the table.
Well, hang on. He's pointing at Zelensky the whole time. I mean, talking of pointing fingers, he's calling him a dictator, which you and I both know is fiction.
Well done, Ian. Absolutely. And again, from the point being, how does he get the Russians to the table? Well, put a little pressure on the Ukrainians, which actually gets more European unity behind Zelensky and gets more of the Ukrainians behind Zelensky. It actually strengthens his position at the negotiating table. I'm not saying he did that intentionally, but that is the result. The other thing that we have to look at is that was specifically about the critical minerals deal. Now, the United States is, remember, President Trump tried to buy Greenland. Why? Critical minerals. The Chinese have put export controls on the most important critical minerals for our defense and for our technology. So President Trump is keen to get access to those minerals. And that whole spat was over the critical minerals deal. As you see, they've been talking. Zelensky said they had a very good phone conversation. If it wasn't today, it was yesterday. And so let's kind of back on track. With President Trump, don't listen to what he says. Listen to the spirit of what he says. That's one of the things we learned in the Pentagon in the first Trump administration. Unless it's an official decision that comes out of the White House in writing, do not react to it. Actions, not words.
Okay.
Official decisions, not tweets. That's what we did.
Well, I'm sure that our Prime Minister will bear that in mind when he meets President Trump on Thursday. I'd like to be a fly on the wall for that one. Mike, we have to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Michael C. Ryan, US Defence Analyst.